In a small southern town, long settled beneath the stubborn weight of prejudice, a warm late afternoon sun stretches across a dusty main street. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The center of the square is dominated by an old statue, a long-forgotten Confederate officer with sword raised high, as if forever claiming dominion over the quiet lanes. Shuttered windows, peeling paint, and the faint smell of boiled cabbage drifting from the diner all set a stage worn thin by time. Mary Louise, a woman in her early 30s. She is neither wealthy nor especially famous, just a quiet figure who carries herself with a certain thoughtful dignity. The townsfolk nod or grunt as she passes. She is no stranger here, just a quiet neighbor. Outside Mr. Fletcher's general store, a knot of locals gathers, voices dropping to a hush as they discuss some bit of unsettling news. Mary Louise halts, pretending to adjust her shopping basket's handle so she can eavesdrop. They mention a Negro lawyer who has dared to set up an office near the old courthouse. Someone calls it a disgrace. Another mutters he won't last long here. Mary Louise does not join in, nor does she protest aloud. Instead, her brows knit with worry. She can feel the atmosphere tighten, thick with contempt. The men's whispers might as well be stone walls, unyielding and cold. She steps away, thoughtful and uneasy. In the fading light, as the statue's shadow stretches like a dark finger across the street, Mary Louise begins to sense a quiet pull inside herself. A question, really. Why should someone be unwelcome for merely wishing to practice law? Later, Mary Louise returns to her small rented home, a tidy place, just 2 rooms and a narrow kitchen. The furniture is plain, a bit worn at the edges, but polished clean. The fading evening light filters through thin curtains, painting gentle rectangles on the wooden floorboards. She settles into a creaking chair beside a shortwave radio, flipping through a newspaper folded in half. There, wedged between announcements of church picnics and the price of feed corn, is a notice. Henry Daniels, ESQ, lawyer, offices at 14 Elm Street. Below it, in smaller print, a line that makes her heart catch, colored attorney hangs shingle. Her eyes linger on those words. So he's here, she thinks, in a town like this, where hard stares and hasty judgments are as common as dust. Why come here? What does he hope to accomplish? She imagines a man stepping off a train, suitcase in hand, determined to practice law where few would welcome him. Mary Louise sets the paper down and wonders if there's something she could do. Maybe not something grand, but at least to see him, to understand. Outside, a lone cricket begins its evening song. Mary Louise, her mind still circling that small newspaper notice, decides that tomorrow she will find his office. She's no one important, but she can offer a friendly word, a neighborly greeting. It feels like the right thing to do, though she's not sure why. She only knows the tightness in her chest suggests she must. The sky flushes orange and pink as Mary Louise steps onto her front porch, a small wooden landing with a single rocking chair and a potted fern wilting from the heat. Her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Redding, shuffles over from her side of the fence. A kind but cautious soul, Mrs. Redding arranges her apron's folds as if tidying her own nervous thoughts. They say he's renting old Mr. Bates's shoe repair shop, Mrs. Redding remarks casually, her voice low. You're not fixin' to visit him, are you? Her eyes narrow slightly. The unspoken rule in this town is clear. Stay in your lane. Do not associate with those who stand outside the accepted order, particularly not a black lawyer. Mary Louise offers tea, shifting the subject, but Mrs. Redding's warning hangs in the air. Mary Louise smiles politely, determined not to show her unsettled heart. She knows the polite thing would be to reassure Mrs. Redding that she'd never do something as scandalous as calling on a colored attorney. Instead, Mary Louise just thanks her neighbor for the conversation and retreats indoors. The neighbor departs, mumbling disapproval. The next morning, before the town fully awakens, the grass around the old courthouse is still wet with dew. It's quiet here, the hush before the world shakes off sleep. Henry Daniels arrives, a tall, dignified man in a well-pressed suit. He looks up at the courthouse, an aging building of brick and white columns. He presses his lips together, feeling the weight of the place and the stories it holds. He can sense the eyes of the townspeople even when none are visible. It's as though the building itself is watching him. From down the street, an elderly man with a cane slows to stare. A woman hurries by, averting her gaze as if Henry were something shameful to behold. The lawyer squares his shoulders and stands firm. He came here with purpose. After all, if the law is to mean anything, it should mean something here too. Back at Mary Louise's home, she stands at her wooden kitchen table, shaping dough into biscuits. With careful hands, she places them on a tin tray. Her kitchen smells of flour and butter, humble comfort. She fixes her hair in the reflection of a window pane, feeling a strange sort of nervousness. She will try to greet him kindly, maybe bring a small token of welcome. It may not be much, but it's something honest. With the basket prepared, Mary Louise straightens her skirt and breathes deeply. The warm biscuits in her basket feel like a fragile olive branch she's extending into unknown territory. Will he welcome it or suspect it as a trick? She cannot know, but she must try. Mary Louise walks along the main street, dust rising at her heels. Her heart beats a little faster with every step. She passes the barber shop, where a few men, Earl, Tom, and a handful of others, lean on the wooden railing, arms folded. Their eyes follow her, curious, then suspicious. "Where are you headed with that basket, Mary Louise?" asks Earl, voice slow and mocking. She meets their gaze. "Just running errands," she says, her voice measured and calm. The air between them turns sharp. She can sense their disapproval, their desire for her to turn around and leave this idea behind. But she does not turn around. She pushes on, her footsteps echoing against storefronts and shuttered windows. Each step takes courage, the kind that sets her apart from the stagnant expectations of this place. The old shoe repair shop is now a law office with a freshly painted sign. Henry Daniels, attorney at law. Mary Louise stands before the door, heart hammering, and then knocks lightly. The door creaks open to reveal Henry, seated at a simple desk, shelves of law books lining the walls. He looks up, guarded curiosity in his eyes. "Good morning," Mary Louise says, voice gentle. She offers the basket. I wanted to welcome you. I made these biscuits." Her hand trembles slightly. Henry rises and accepts the basket with measured politeness. "Thank you, ma'am," he replies. His voice is steady, warm but cautious. He does not know her intentions, only that this is unusual and perhaps dangerous for both of them. Mary Louise clears her throat, unsure what more to say. "I just wanted you to know not everyone here is against you." Her words hang in the quiet air. Henry regards her for a long moment, then nods. It's a small, careful nod. No promises, no easy trust, but gratitude nonetheless. She leaves, heart swirling. Outside, the men across the street watch silently, their disapproval heavier than the humid air. But Mary Louise holds her head high. She has done what she felt was right, planting a small seed of kindness in stony ground. Stepping onto the sidewalk again, Mary Louise senses the eyes of the town upon her. She has crossed an invisible line and now stands apart. It's as though a ripple has passed through the dusty streets, whispering that Mary Louise dared to defy an unwritten code. From across the way, Earl and Tom exchange grim glances. Today, a quiet challenge has been made. A white woman offered kindness to a black lawyer in a place that does not forgive such acts. The wind stirs a scrap of paper at their feet, and the sky grows hot and still. Mary Louise can feel the weight of what she has done, yet she does not regret it. In her heart, a quiet resolve kindles. This cannot be wrong if it feels so necessary and true. In the warm hush of early afternoon, Mary Louise sits at a small table by a window that overlooks a dusty street. She has opened a letter from distant relatives who live far beyond this small town. They have heard rumors of unrest, of racial tensions stirred like silt in a slow river. In their gentle handwriting, they urge her to leave this place, to find a better life where open minds may thrive. She sets the letter down thoughtfully. Something tugs at her heart. She knows the hate here runs thick, Yet she cannot ignore a sense of duty. Through her window's wavy glass, she can just glimpse the old courthouse roof. Closer by, in her mind's eye, she envisions Henry Daniels in that cramped law office, poring over legal texts in silence. She wonders if she has the courage to stay and help him weather the storm. Henry Daniels sits alone at his desk, sleeves rolled up, eyes lingering over well-worn law books. The space is cramped, paint peeling along the walls, a lingering smell of old leather from the shop that once was. He has chosen these humble quarters, hoping he could offer justice where it rarely sees the light of day. He sifts through his case files. Few are brave enough to hire him, most too frightened of the consequences. Still, a small property dispute case rests before him, giving him reason to stay. Outside, he hears the soft steps of passers-by who do not stop, do not knock. He turns to the basket Mary Louise brought the day before, now empty but for a crumb or two. A faint smile touches his lips. Perhaps not everyone is an enemy, after all. In the heat of the day, beneath that statue's stony gaze, a knot of white men huddle together. Earl, Tom, and a few others. Their posture is stiff, arms crossed, voices low and mean. They complain about that Negro who thinks himself fit to practice law here. Worse, they hiss, there's a white woman cozying up to him. Mary Louise, a name now spoken with suspicion. The sheriff's deputy loiters nearby, shooting sidelong glances, but making no move to stop the hateful chatter. Earl's lip curls as he mutters something about teaching a lesson, reminding outsiders that things don't change so easily here. Silent tension builds, as if the statue itself were holding its breath. Mary Louise sits rocking gently on her porch, a pitcher of cool water at her side. Her neighbor, Mrs. Redding, appears again, this time more insistent. "Child," she says, twisting her apron, "you mustn't stir things up. This town won't stand for it." Her voice trembles between worry and reproach. Mary Louise remains polite. She thanks Mrs. Redding for her concern, but makes no promise to shun the lawyer. Beneath Mrs. Redding's fretful eyes, Mary Louise's quiet resolve grows. She senses that each kind word she offered Henry now sets her apart from her own people, and it frightens her, but not enough to make her yield. That evening, Mary Louise gathers what courage she can and steps back into Henry's small office. She carries a stack of old legal text she inherited from a grandfather she never knew well, a man who believed in fairness, at least on paper. Henry greets her cautiously, but with less tension than before. They exchange few words. Mary Louise offers the books, explaining they might help, and Henry accepts them with quiet gratitude. She knows the risks. The town's eyes are everywhere. But at that moment, in the gentle lamplight of the cramped room, she realizes they stand on common ground, the desire to see justice done. Henry looks at the door, then back at Mary Louise. Her hands tremble slightly, but she does not run. He nods in thanks and she leaves, each footstep a declaration of her stance. As dusk settles, Earl and Tom lurk in a narrow alley behind Henry's office. They peer through a cracked pane of glass, watching Henry tidy up, pacing with his law books. They consider throwing a rock, just to smash a window and send a message. But they hold back, whispering plans instead. Perhaps they can lean on the landlord to evict Henry. Maybe they can warn Mary Louise's landlord to raise her rent or push her out. A quiet, underhanded war is forming. The men's voices are low, their breath smelling of tobacco and bitterness. In the fading light, their silhouettes look like crooked shadows against the old brick wall. In her small bedroom, lit only by a single lamp, Mary Louise sits on her bed, knees drawn up, reading a newspaper clipping about civil rights cases from beyond the county line. She fingers the edges of the paper, careful not to tear it. Here, in the privacy of her room, she allows herself to consider that Henry's presence could mean something greater, a step toward fairness, even if small and contested. She wonders if she has stepped into something larger than herself. Her heart flutters with doubt, fear, but also a quiet thrill at doing what feels right. In the hush, only the gentle ticking of a clock keeps time. She closes her eyes, resolved to keep helping, no matter the cost. Henry, too, sits up late under a dim lamp, pen scratching across paper as he writes a careful letter to a minter up north. He does not detail every thread, only enough to convey the challenges. In his mind's eye, he recalls Mary Louise's earnest face, her biscuits, her old legal books. Unexpected kindness in a barren place. He finishes the letter, folds it neatly, and sets it aside. Outside, the night is still. No footsteps echo now, no angry voices rise. Yet Henry knows that beneath this silence lurks tension. He turns off the lamp and sits in the darkness for a moment, shoulders set, heart steady. Tomorrow, he will continue this quiet fight. He is not alone. It seems, not entirely. The following morning dawns clear and bright, as if nature itself is trying to wash away the town's tarnish. Mary Louise steps onto the dusty main street with cautious poise. The old wooden storefronts, with their peeling paint and crooked signs, greet her with a silence thicker than usual. She notices how her neighbors seem to turn their shoulders, lower their gazes, as if she has become a stranger overnight. Where once she received polite nods, now she is met by cold stares or sudden, unnatural interest in a distant horizon. Along the sidewalk, torn scraps of paper catch her eye. They are the remnants of a small flyer Henry must have posted, one listing his services and specialties in quiet, modest print. She kneels and picks up a piece, smoothing it against her skirt. Someone has ripped these notices down with deliberate force. Mary Louise replaces one fragment on the wall, her small act of defiance as simple as pressing paper against rough wood. The onlookers say nothing, but their silent disapproval is palpable. She continues on, head unbowed. Within the cramped law office, Henry Daniels sits opposite a timid visitor. Mr. Johnson, a soft-spoken black gentleman, came just after sunrise, slipping in with the caution of a hunted deer. He needs help with a property line dispute, something minor on paper but heavy with fear in practice. He confides to Henry that he can't be seen here by too many witnesses. He would face punishment in cruel, invisible ways. Henry listens, nods, understands. He takes notes, though he knows such a case could invite more hostility. Through the window, Henry spots Mary Louise passing by. She does not see him, but her posture suggests a kind of fierce persistence. He can sense her loyalty, even if he does not fully comprehend what drives her. For a moment, he feels a bit less alone. He straightens the collar of his shirt, stands a touch taller. The courage of others, even quiet and ordinary souls like Mary Louise, can be a balm. Under a sharp sun, Earl and Tom find their way into the county building where Sheriff McCallum sits behind a wide wooden desk. The walls hold dusty wanted posters and a pair of crossed rifles. The sheriff, broad-shouldered and slow-moving, listens to Earl's complaint that Henry Daniels is a troublemaker and Mary Louise is encouraging him. Sheriff McCallum sighs long and low, tapping a pencil against the desk. He gives no direct orders, but his hint is loud as thunder. He will not protect outsiders who stir the pot. Fellas, he says, voice gravelly and slow, I can't say I'll be too quick to interfere if some folks need a reminding of how things work. Earl smiles thinly. Tom nods. Outside, a crow calls harshly. The sheriff's office door swings shut, and the day grows just a bit darker. Mary Louise is startled from her reading by a knock at her door. It's Henry, who steps inside gingerly, hat in hand. He has come to return a legal volume she lent him and to inquire if she might know someone willing to give a witness statement. There is a delicate tension between them, not of fear, but of respect mixed with concern. She looks at him with steady eyes. I know this town doesn't like what we're doing, she says quietly, but I'm still willing. Henry's shoulders loosen slightly, as if relieved to hear it. He reminds her gently that her kind acts may put her in danger. She nods, aware, accepting. The afternoon sunlight slants through the window, illuminating them both like figures in an old photograph. For a moment, neither is alone. Inside the dim, cramped back room of Fletcher's General Store, a small council convenes. These are local businessmen, the store owner, and even a white preacher who fiddles nervously with his collar. They talk in hushed, urgent tones about Henry Daniels and Mary Louise. The preacher suggests praying for the town's soul, but the others are more practical. They speak of boycotts, of making Mary Louise's rent rise, of threatening those who might think of hiring Henry. Their words are full of quiet menace. No one admits to wanting direct violence, at least not yet. But their willingness to destroy reputations and livelihoods is a calculated cruelty. Outside, the late-day sun filters through dusty shelves, and the smell of flour and old coffee beans mixes with the sharp scent of fear. Here in this cramped space, decisions are made that will shape the future for Henry and Mary Louise. As the sky paints itself in gold and crimson, Mary Louise's cousin Caroline steps onto her porch. Caroline traveled from the north and is visibly shaken by the tensions she's witnessed. She begs Mary Louise to leave, pleads that this fight isn't hers to fight, that no good can come of it. Mary Louise sets a hand on Caroline's arm, voice gentle but firm. "I can't run," she says simply. "I can't pretend I haven't seen what I've seen." Caroline's eyes fill with tears, for she fears her cousin is choosing danger over safety, hardship over comfort. But Mary Louise has chosen to stand where it matters, no matter the cost. When Caroline departs, Mary Louise remains, gazing at the lengthening shadows in the distant shape of Henry's office roofline. In the thickening dusk, Henry works by lamplight. He pores over legal briefs and old case law. A sudden crack shatters his focus. Outside, someone has hurled a stone against the glass. The pane doesn't fully break, but the crack runs jagged, distorting his reflection. Henry rushes to the door, sees no one, just the empty street, a silent threat left behind. He returns to his desk, heart pounding. He will not run. He will not abandon his post. He works through the night, determined to make sense of the next day's tasks. The lamp's glow is small and flickering, but within Henry burns a steadier flame. He is here to serve justice, even if justice is an unwelcome guest. High in her modest bedroom, Mary Louise stares out the window, lantern turned low. In the distance, she thinks she hears a muffled voice, a flash of tension, but it settles into silence. She imagines Henry at his desk, the uncertain future they share. She as a supporter, he is a beacon of law in a lawless mindset. Outside, stars blink wearily against a wide, quiet sky. This town is built on old bones and old rules, and Mary Louise understands now that breaking free won't be easy. Yet the knowledge doesn't discourage her. Instead, it stiffens her spine. She turns down her lantern and slips into bed, mind racing, heart steady. Tomorrow, she will rise and continue this quiet defiance, standing beside a man who dares to believe fairness can live here, even if only as a fragile seed. The morning sun filters through the cracked window pane, casting a jagged shadow on Henry's wooden desk. He sits, shoulders bent slightly, reading through a bundle of letters. Among them is a plea from Mrs. Turner, a black woman whose husband has been arrested for a crime he swears he did not commit. Henry can tell at once. This is no small matter. A criminal case is altogether different, riskier, both for him and for anyone who might dare to help. Mrs. Turner, slender and tired, stands before him wringing her hands. She explains that her husband was taken in on vague charges, the sort that stick too easily to a black man in these parts. With trembling voice, she begs Henry for help. He listens calmly, though his heart tightens. Taking on this case means challenging the town's core assumptions in open court. Still, he agrees. He can do no less. This is why he came here in the first place, to see that justice, real justice, is not denied. After Mrs. Turner leaves, Henry steps out into the bright light and, on an impulse, heads for Mary Louise's small, tidy home. She opens the door, surprised but not displeased. The modest room smells of lavender soap and fresh air. Henry tells her of the Turner case. He needs help gathering information, discreetly. Some people might speak to Mary Louise where they would never talk to a black lawyer. Mary Louise listens intently, pressing her hands together. She feels the weight of this request. If gossip was fierce before, it will grow teeth now. Yet when she looks into Henry's eyes, she sees neither defeat nor fear, only resolve and a plea for honest assistance. "I'll help," she says simply, her voice a steady note in the quiet room. Henry nods, grateful, and for a moment they share an understanding. They are in this together, for better or worse. Mary Louise sets off on foot to speak with a potential witness. Mr. Hicks, a white laborer who works on a distant farm, might have seen what happened the night Mr. Turner was arrested. The road is empty and hot. Grasshoppers rasp in the weeds. Mary Louise's heart beats fast as she approaches Hicks, who stands leaning against a broken fence rail. At first, he is hostile, suspicious of any talk about the Turner arrest. "I ain't looking for trouble," he mutters, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. Mary Louise doesn't back down. In careful, measured words, she explains that all they want is the truth. Hicks looks at her with puzzled eyes. A white woman asking questions that challenge the town's story is a rarity. He doesn't promise to testify, but he doesn't slam the door of conversation shut, either. Instead, he says he'll think it over, leaving Mary Louise with a pinch of hope amid all the uncertainty. Henry waits by an old abandoned church on the outskirts, where chipped white paint flakes from the clapboards. Crows caw in the rafters of the old steeple. Mary Louise arrives a little breathless, carrying a notebook where she jotted down Hicks's hesitant words. She reports back what she learned. Hicks saw enough to doubt the official story. He just needs courage to speak. Henry nods, quietly impressed. In the fading light of the afternoon, they whisper plans. Mary Louise will try another witness, perhaps a black neighbor who might have been too fearful to step forward before. Henry will prepare legal precedents, searching through those old law books Mary Louise brought him. Their voices, low and determined, fill the empty church with a sense of purpose. Outside, cicadas sing in the brush, as if applauding their quiet bravery. Across town, inside the warm glow of the sheriff's office, Sheriff McCallum and Earl sit discussing rumors. The sheriff leans back in his chair, boots crossed on the desk, as Earl paces the floorboards. They have caught wind that Henry is working on a big case, and that Mary Louise is poking around. Their easy sneers give way to a harder edge. "If she keeps meddling, we'll have to make it clear she ain't welcome," the sheriff says, voice low and final. Earl nods, a smile that doesn't touch his eyes stretching across his face. Outside the window, dusk settles over the quiet street, and the threat in their voices hangs in the still air, waiting to be carried out. Mary Louise returns home to find Caroline, her cousin from the north, packing a small suitcase under the fading purple sky. "Caroline cannot stay here any longer," she says tearfully. She cannot watch Mary Louise walk into danger so willingly. Mary Louise tries to explain that doing what is right often comes at a cost. Caroline shakes her head, embraces her cousin one last time, and leaves with a trembling farewell. Mary Louise stands alone in her backyard. The crickets chirr, and the scent of honeysuckle drifts by. She's more isolated than ever, but also more certain. She will not run. The truth is too important to forsake now. A soft lamplight glows in Henry's cramped office as he pores over pages of legal precedents, brushstrokes of ink on yellowed paper. He finds cases decided in distant courts that might help Turner's defense. He sets them aside carefully, gratitude filling him as he recalls Mary Louise's face. The way she risked her own comfort and safety to bring him these old law books and find reluctant witnesses. He dips his pen to ink and writes notes, formulating a strategy. The Turner case will come to trial soon. He knows a victory will mean something monumental here. Yet victory will not be easily won. The odds are stacked high, like rotten crates threatening to collapse. He can almost feel the weight of the town's anger pressing against his thin walls. Under moonlight, Mary Louise sits on her porch, listening to the quiet hum of nighttime insects. A shadow flits at the edge of her yard, causing her heart to leap. She stands quickly, peering into the gloom, but the shape fades away. Was it Earl? Tom? One of their friends lurking to scare her off? She doesn't know. She steps off the porch, stands on the bare earth, and steadies herself. They want her to be afraid. They want her to back down. She grips the porch rail and exhales. Then, with a resolve that surprises even herself, she raises her chin to the silent stars and whispers, "No, The next morning, Mary Louise attempts a routine task, buying produce at the open-air market set around the old statue in the town center. The air is warm and smells faintly of apples and hay. She approaches a stall stacked with plump tomatoes, ears of corn, and bushels of leafy greens. The vendor, who once greeted her cheerily, now avoids her eyes. Mary Louise clears her throat and points to a basket of peaches. The vendor makes no move to help. Another shopper steps in, and the vendor serves them instead. Mary Louise tries again, voice soft but firm. "I'd like to purchase some peaches, please." A silence falls. Passers-by watch, some smirking, others turning away. The vendor finally shakes his head curtly. She is being shunned, punished for defying the town's unwritten code. Mary Louise leaves empty-handed, cheeks warm and heart aching. The markets chatter resumes as if nothing happened. The statue, ever vigilant, seems to be watching, but says nothing. Inside the narrow office, Henry sits across from Mary Louise, who reports her latest attempts at coaxing reluctant witnesses. No one wants to step forward publicly. Fear is too deep and old. Henry, ever patient, sifts through their options. He thanks her for her efforts, acknowledging quietly that this case is bigger than both of them. She sees the strain around his eyes, the weight of every setback, the knowledge that justice must be won against towering odds. Mary Louise resists the urge to apologize, for it's not her fault people are afraid. Instead, she sets her jaw and suggests a new lead. Henry nods, and they share a moment of determined silence, a pact that they will keep going, no matter the cost. Following Henry's advice, Mary Louise seeks out Mrs. Johnson, a gentle black woman who once consulted Henry about a property issue. Mrs. Johnson meets Mary Louise at the edge of a weedy lot behind old sheds. She glances over her shoulder, voice low, as if the wind might carry their words to dangerous ears. Mrs. Johnson did witness a telling event the night of the arrest, enough to cast doubt on the sheriff's version of things. But she is terrified. She has children, a husband, a life here, fragile and easily shattered. Mary Louise, speaking gently, promises discretion, compassion, and a real chance to see the truth recognized. Mrs. Johnson, hands trembling, agrees to sign a written statement. No public appearance yet, just words on paper. It's a small victory, but Mary Louise's heart lifts. Even the smallest candle can push back the darkness. In the creaking hush of an old barn at the town's edge, Earl and Tom meet two other men, their faces hardened with quiet malice. Swallows nest in the rafters, their fluttering wings the only soft sound. The men discuss strategies, their voices low and grim. A decision is made. Intimidation must be ramped up. If Henry won't leave and Mary Louise won't back down, then perhaps a clear, violent message is needed. Nothing too public, just enough to shatter Mary Louise's sense of safety. They grin, showing tobacco-stained teeth, and step out into the fading light. The barn door swings shut behind them, leaving dust motes to swirl in their wake. Mary Louise returns home, dusk settling gently over her small street. She flits on the lamp in her living room and notices a folded slip of paper on the floor, slipped under the door's gap. Unfolding it, she finds a crudely written thread. "Back off, or else." Her hand trembles. She presses her lips together and sits on the edge of a threadbare armchair. The silence in her home feels heavy, pressing on her lungs. Slowly, she sets the note aside and steels herself. She will not yield to words scrawled in secret. If anything, the threat only confirms she's on the right path. It shows her that the work she and Henry do matters, enough to scare the bullies. Under the flicker of lamplight, Mary Louise shows the note to Henry. He reads it, eyes darkening. He urges her to reconsider her involvement, but she meets his gaze with a resolve that surprises even him. "You asked for help. I gave it," she says quietly. "I won't abandon you now." They speak little after that, but understanding passes between them. They are allied not just against one injustice, but against an entire system of cruelty and silence. Outside, footsteps fade down empty streets. Inside, two determined souls plan for a trial that could set a precedent no one here wants set. Henry visits the cramped, dimly lit jail where Mr. Turner sits behind iron bars. Turner is frightened, shoulders hunched, eyes darting nervously. Henry speaks quietly, assuring him that they are building a defense. Turner's eyes widen with surprise when Henry mentions a white woman helping, risking her own standing. "That's more than I expected," Turner whispers. He grips the bars, knuckles pale. Henry nods. It is indeed remarkable, and each day it makes him sure that decency can exist even in the most hostile soil. They part with a whispered promise. Henry will not give up. Mr. Turner nods gratefully, though fear does not leave his eyes. In her small bedroom, Mary Louise sits cross-legged on the bed, turning the threat note between her fingers. Outside, the night hums softly, and a faint breeze stirs the curtain. She knows the danger is real. Stones and threats today could become something worse tomorrow. Yet her gaze drifts to the law books Henry borrowed, now stacked neatly on a table. She remembers the courage in his voice, the gratitude in Mrs. Johnson's eyes, the hesitant promise of Hicks, and the silent respect they share. These are not small things. They are seeds of change. She presses the note flat on her bedside table and determines that tomorrow, and every day after, she will continue this fight. Her heart beats steady, steady, steady. At the first blush of morning, Mary Louise steps outside to water her fern and finds the remnants of last night's malice. Someone has broken a terracotta flower pot, scattering dirt and shards across the weathered planks. Worse, dark slurs and warnings have been painted on her fence in crude, dripping letters. She stands still, heart sinking, yet she refuses to look away. Instead, she breathes in, shoulders squared, and sets to work cleaning it up. As she scrubs the fence, neighbors peek from behind curtains. No one offers help. A few watch with cold satisfaction, as if hoping she will break down in tears. But Mary Louise does not weep. Her silence as she wipes away hateful words is more defiant than any shout could be. Within the dim office, Henry and Mary Louise pore over documents. Henry finds a legal precedent in one of the old books Mary Louise provided, a rare case from another state, where the testimony of a black defendant was weighed fairly despite local bias. It's a thin reed of hope, but a reed nonetheless. They speak in low voices, conscious that the walls have ears. This trial could bring the town's simmering hate to a boil. Yet they cling to facts, reason, and the belief that truth can sometimes pierce the hardest armor. Henry meets Mary Louise's eyes. For the first time, he allows a small, genuine smile. Their work together is honest, good. Amid darkness, they have forged a light. Returning from a fruitless search for more witnesses, Mary Louise takes a shortcut through a narrow alley. The wooden walls are close, the ground strewn with old crates. Suddenly, Earl and Tom emerge like wolves from the shadows. Earl's voice is low, mocking. "Think you're changing anything?" He grabs Mary Louise's wrist, pressing her roughly against the wall. Her heart hammers, but she does not cry out. She fixes him with a steady glare and says, "You can harm me, but you can't stop the truth." Her calm rattles them. Earl's grip tightens a moment, then he shoves her away, disgusted. She stumbles but does not fall. The men vanish back into the shadows, leaving her shaken. She catches her breath, pressing a trembling hand to her chest, and finds that her resolve remains unshaken. Mary Louise tries to report the assault. Inside the sheriff's domain, wooden floors creaking, dust spinning in angled sunlight. Sheriff McCallum meets her words with a bored gaze. He shrugs, muttering something like, "If you didn't meddle, you wouldn't find trouble. There will be no justice here." Mary Louise's anger flares, but instead of quarreling, she turns on her heel and leaves. The sheriff leans back, balancing his chair on two legs, smirking. He believes the old order is safe, that fear and silence will hold forever. Mary Louise's departing footsteps echo in the quiet hall, defiant. Henry prepares for the looming trial date. Papers are neatly stacked, testimony drafts arranged. Mary Louise updates him on her efforts. She cannot guarantee any witness will testify openly, but she has promises of quiet statements, hints, and leads that point to the sheriff's wrongdoing. Henry thanks her solemnly. He can see the strain etched around her eyes, how the day's terrors have worn on her. He hesitates, then gently encourages her to step back for her own safety. Mary Louise refuses. She is in this now, heart and soul. They sit side by side, wordless, as the last rays of sunlight die on the sill. Henry stands alone in the old church where they once met. The moon's light slants through cracked windows, illuminating dusty pews. He closes his eyes and wrestles with doubt. Could he leave? Could he abandon this place to save himself? To spare Mary Louise from further harm? A memory of her determined face returns to him. Her kind gestures, her calm bravery, and he knows he cannot abandon the fight. He came to bring fairness to a place that resents it, and now, more than ever, he must stay. The silence of the church feels like an answer. Do not falter. Mary Louise is awakened by a sudden crash. Rising quickly, she discovers a brick thrown through her window. Glass shards glitter on the floor, moonlight reflecting in sharp edges. No note this time, just an escalation from threats to tangible violence. Her hands shake as she brushes away the shards, a small cut stinging her palm. She stands amidst the wreckage, breathing raggedly. Every act of destruction only hardens her resolve. They can break her window, but not her spirit. She sets about boarding the gap as best she can, even as her eyes burn with unshed tears. Under the milky glow of a near-full moon, Mary Louise and Henry meet by a small creek at the town's edge, where tall reeds whisper with the breeze. The night is gentle here, away from prying eyes and hateful whispers. They don't say much. Words seem small in the face of what they both know must come. The trial, the danger, the risk of failure, and the possibility of real change. Mary Louise finds Henry's hand and squeezes it lightly, a silent promise that they stand together. He nods, expression somber but resolved. The creek murmurs softly, carrying their quiet determination downstream into the dark unknown. A hush settles over the town as morning dawns on the day of the trial. The courthouse, once just another old brick building, now looms large in everyone's minds. Its white columns shine in the early light, and a crowd gathers, drawn by the promise of spectacle and tension. White men in pressed shirts and hats, women clutching handkerchiefs, and a handful of black citizens standing somewhat apart. Everyone takes a position, as if waiting for a parade. Mary Louise approaches alone, chin raised. She feels the weight of 100 stares. Some spit at the ground near her feet. A few mutter insults under their breath. Inside her, fear and determination wrestle. Then Henry appears, stepping onto the courthouse steps with quiet dignity. Mary Louise's heart eases slightly. She and Henry exchange a nod before entering. This building, with its creaking floors and dusty benches, will bear witness to a historic day. The courtroom smells faintly of old varnish and stale perfume. Wooden benches line up in rows, and every seat is taken. The judge, a stern-faced white man with thick eyebrows, sits elevated behind his desk. 12 potential jurors, white men all, file in and take their places in the box. Henry stands at the defense table beside Mr. Turner, who sits stiff and silent, hands clasped in his lap. Henry tries to remove overtly biased jurors, naming reasons and citing precedents. But it is an uphill struggle. Most remain seated, stone-faced and tight-lipped. Mary Louise watches from a back row, clenched hands hidden in her lap, silently willing Henry to find even a whisper of fairness here. Each decision by the judge feels like a weighted coin toss, landing too often on the wrong side. The prosecutor, a confident, silver-haired local man, steps forward. He crafts a narrative with cunning skill. Mr. Turner, he claims, resisted a lawful arrest. His tone implies danger and criminal intent without ever needing to prove it fully. Witness after witness takes the stand, each telling a similar tale, painting Turner as a menace. The crowd nods along, comfortable with a familiar script. Henry watches with narrowed eyes, noting every inconsistency. He knows these stories are shaped by fear and prejudice, not truth. From the back, Mary Louise feels her blood simmer. She recognizes the subtle lies. Hesitations, forced bravado, contradictions in details. Even the prosecutor's voice, smooth as polished stone, carries a note of smug certainty that makes her heart ache. At last, Henry stands and calls Mrs. Johnson to the stand. She steps forward, eyes lowered, voice trembling. The tension in the room crackles like static before a storm. Carefully, respectfully, Henry leads her through the night in question. She describes what she saw. Turner approached by the deputy, the tone and posture of the lawman far from kind or lawful. The prosecutor tries to rattle her, interrupting, sneering, but Mrs. Johnson does not crumble. Her truth is simple and quiet, shining through her trembling words. Mary Louise watches, heart in her throat. One honest voice at last. The murmurs in the gallery rise and subside. Some people frown, unsettled by a perspective they never wanted to hear. Henry's next move is bolder. He calls Mr. Hicks, the reluctant white witness Mary Louise found. A rustle sweeps the courtroom. Hicks's presence is unexpected. He stands up slowly, wiping sweat from his forehead as he takes the oath. His eyes dart to Mary Louise, who holds his gaze, silently encouraging him. At first, Hicks stammers, evading direct answers. But Henry's gentle questions guide him along, and at last, Hicks admits he saw the deputy strike Turner first. Gasps ripple through the benches. The prosecutor pounces, attempting to discredit Hicks as confused or drunk that night. Hicks shrinks, but does not retract his testimony. Mary Louise silently thanks the heavens. A single domino has tipped in the opposite direction, a slender beam of truth slipping into the trial's dim light. The day grows long, dust motes dancing in sunbeams slanting through tall windows. Henry stands before the jury now. He speaks calmly, passionately, reminding them that laws mean little if not applied equally. He asks them to consider that Mr. Turner deserves the same fair measure as any man. He cites the precedent he found in the old volumes, forging a chain between one distant courtroom and this one. The prosecutor snorts, tries to reaffirm the town's old ways, saying this is all a waste of time, that everyone knows how things work here. But Henry's words hang in the air, resonating with something seldom acknowledged in this place. Mary Louise feels tears prick her eyes. She grips the bench's edge, holding fast to hope. Outside, a crow cries, and the hush inside seems to breathe with anticipation. The jury files out to deliberate. The courtroom empties into the humid afternoon outside, where the crowd mills about in uneasy clusters. Mary Louise finds a patch of shade beneath an old oak tree. Henry joins her, tie loosened. They say little, each locked in their own thoughts. In the distance, Earl leans against the courthouse wall, sneering at them. The sheriff passes by, offering no comfort. Time drags. Mary Louise tries to read Henry's face, but he is deep in thought, perhaps praying silently, or recalling every fact and phrase he used. She rests a hand on his arm briefly, a gesture of encouragement. They have done all they can. Now it's up to 12 men who carry centuries of prejudice behind their eyes. As afternoon dips toward evening, the jury returns. The crowd rushes back inside. Murmurs hush to tense silence. Every wooden bench creaks as people settle in. The judge clears his throat. The foreman stands with a paper in hand. Henry and Mary Louise lean forward. Mr. Turner's eyes shine with fear and hope, knuckles white where they grip the table's edge. The foreman reads the verdict. Not guilty. A collective gasp sweeps the room. For a moment, the silence is absolute. Then confusion, murmurs, and a stifled cry from Mrs. Turner, who stands at the back, tears streaming down her cheeks. Henry bows his head in quiet relief, shoulders shuddering with the weight falling away. Mary Louise's heart surges with joy and disbelief. Against all odds, the truth broke through. The courthouse doors fling open as the crowd pours out, stunned and murmuring. Henry and Mary Louise stand on the steps, blinking in the late afternoon sunlight. Behind them, Mr. Turner and his wife linger, tears of relief mixing with cautious gratitude. They remain at Henry's shoulder until he gently urges them to hurry home, away from the gathering mob's glare. The townspeople knot together in uneasy clusters, some outraged, some shocked into silence. A few young men spit on the ground, fists clenched as if to strike at thin air. Mary Louise steps closer to Henry. She can feel the tension rise, the breath of the crowd growing hot and stale. But no one dares attack them here, in broad daylight, right after a courtroom decision. Instead, the hate simmers, waiting for nightfall. In a shadowed alley not far away, Earl and Tom exchange grim looks. The verdict feels like an affront, a personal insult to the town's old ways. They mutter oaths, swearing that Henry Daniels will not sleep easy and that Mary Louise will regret standing at his side. Their anger is a dark current, seeking an outlet. They decide to wait, to let the evening settle before they make their next move. A few more join them, others who feel the ground shifting under their feet, furious that a black lawyer dared to win and that a white woman dared to help him. The alley grows darker as the sun dips low, and their whispers run like poison through the quiet air. Mary Louise returns home to find her living room ransacked, chairs overturned, a table broken, and slurs scrawled again on her walls. The damage is worse than before, as if someone rushed in the moment the trial ended. She lifts a splintered wooden chair, setting it upright with trembling hands. Despite the chaos, she is strangely calm. The verdict, shining like a candle in her mind, gives her strength. They cannot undo what happened in that courtroom. She cleans in silence, determined. Every scrape of a broom, every piece of shattered glass gathered in her dustpan becomes an act of defiance. She does not cry. Instead, she finds a quiet dignity in restoring order to her small home, piece by piece. Henry's office is blessedly untouched, though he doubts it will remain so for long. He sits at his desk, head in his hands, absorbing the day's events. A small smile tugs at his mouth as he recalls the verdict's announcement. Not guilty. Against all odds. He pulls a sheet of paper toward him and begins writing a letter to his old mentor up north. He keeps it matter of fact, but his pen strokes are lighter than they've ever been. He makes note of the allies who helped him, particularly one brave white woman who risked everything to ensure justice prevailed. He signs off with hope, an unfamiliar sweetness in his heart. The statue in the town square, so long a silent sentinel of old ways, now seems to loom ominously in the waning light. Townsfolk gather in small groups, voices tense and hushed. Some are furious, calling for justice of their own brand. Others look uneasy, the verdict rattling their long-held assumptions. A few younger residents exchange uncertain glances. One or two even admit, in low tones, that the law should be the law, and Henry just proved it. It's a moment of quiet fracture in the old, rigid shell of tradition. Mary Louise's name slips through their conversations, sometimes cursed, sometimes spoken with grudging respect. Henry steps inside a small black church a few streets away. Word of the victory has spread quietly, and a handful of congregants are gathered, lighting candles and whispering prayers of thanks. They nod at Henry, some with tears in their eyes. Though they say little, their faces reflect relief, admiration, and a cautious, grateful pride. Henry removes his hat and bows his head, overwhelmed by the meaning of this moment. He knows this trial will not end bigotry, nor erase fear overnight. But it shows what can happen when truth finds a voice and at least one other person dares to listen. Mary Louise sits on her porch, a lantern glowing softly beside her. She half expects a rock or a brick to come flying from the darkness. Instead, to her shock, a sack of produce has been left at her gate, fresh apples and beans. She looks around, but sees no one. Is it an act of pity? Regret? A neighbor's quiet apology? She cannot know. She only understands that the town's response is not uniform. Some hearts might be stirred, if only slightly. She brings the produce inside, sets it gently on the mended table, and rests her hand on the cool apples. Perhaps not everyone chooses hate. Perhaps some are thinking anew. Unable to sleep, Mary Louise climbs the small hill outside of town, the one that overlooks roofs and chimneys and the courthouse's distant outline. She stands alone, feeling the night breeze against her face. Down below, The town still simmers. No instant rebirth. She knows the sheriff will do nothing to protect her or Henry. She knows that Earl and Tom and others like them still plot trouble. Yet she also knows that a trial ended in truth, that one innocent man was spared a false fate. She has done something meaningful, helped prove that right can prevail, even here. In her pocket is a small scrap of the torn flyer Henry posted days ago, the one she set upright. She smooths it with her thumb, smiling softly. As dawn's first light edges the horizon, Mary Louise inhales deeply. She will face tomorrow with raised head, no matter what comes. For now, she savors the quiet triumph of the day's hard-won victory and the faint tremor of change whispering through this old, stubborn town. The day dawns softer than before. Mary Louise steps into her yard, broom in hand, expecting more damage after yesterday's upheaval. Instead, she finds only silence and the gentle scent of dew. The slurs have been scrubbed away by her own diligent hand. The broken pieces have been gathered. Now, early sunlight gilds the fence as if to say, something has shifted. She notices a sack of produce left from the night before, untouched. She picks up an apple and takes a thoughtful bite. It's crisp and sweet. Perhaps a neighbor left it as a subtle apology or a gesture of uneasy respect. In this quiet moment, Mary Louise savors the taste, hopeful that small kindnesses might sprout in bitter soil. Henry sits at his desk, the window pane repaired with careful tacks and a new sheet of glass. Though the town remains tense, he has more reason than ever to stay. He thumbs through case notes and law books, already thinking of clients who might now be brave enough to seek his help openly. Mary Louise arrives, carrying a stack of fresh ink and paper, small gifts to support his work. They chat in low voices, not needing to say much. The victory has created a fragile alliance, a bond forged in trials and testimony. In their exchange of small smiles and helpful tools, they confirm their partnership going forward, lawyer and ally, each making the other stand possible. As Henry and Mary Louise walk together, several townsfolk watch from windows and doorways. Earl lingers in the shadows, cigarette smoke curling around his tight-lipped scowl. He does not approach. Perhaps he senses that raw intimidation won't be as easy after the trial's verdict. His presence still weighs heavily, but he remains silent. A few others nod stiffly as Henry and Mary Louise pass, unsure but not openly hostile. Some faces hold shame, others a cautious neutrality. Mary Louise cannot say the town has changed overnight, but it seems less eager to lash out violently, at least today. She meets Henry's gaze, relieved at the moment's calm. In the heart of the town, the old statue still stands, but now it seems more a relic than a guiding star. A handful of black residents pass through the square, their steps a fraction lighter than before, as if the trial's outcome offers a delicate reprieve. No one cheers or celebrates openly, but Mary Louise catches quiet nods of acknowledgement. Henry halts near a corner of the square, posting a new flyer advertising his services. He hammers in the small tack, tap, 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 like a heartbeat of change. This time, no one immediately tears it down. Children glance curiously, and an old man nearby just shrugs rather than jeer. It's a subtle shift, a flicker of acceptance in a place once sealed shut. Inside her modest home, Mary Louise unfolds another letter from her northern relatives. They are worried, urging her again to leave this place of bigotry and danger. She smooths the paper thoughtfully. Setting it aside, she glances at her tidy living room, newly put right. She does not answer the letter just yet. Though leaving might bring ease, staying feels purposeful. She has planted something here, a seed of courage and conscience. To depart now would be to abandon it before it can bloom. She runs her fingertips over the chair's arm, the mended table, the broom handle. These things have cost her dearly, and so has this victory, fragile though it may be. Henry pins another letter to his mentor, detailing the aftermath of the trial. He does not pretend that the town is healed. He writes honestly of the remaining threats, the pervasive silence, and the wary glances. But he also describes Mary Louise's unwavering help, the tiny gestures of tolerance, the produce on her porch, and a jury's unexpected fairness. He signs the letter with a quiet note of hope. Hope that this small triumph might pave the way for more justice, one case at a time. He places the letter in an envelope, sealing it carefully, as if preserving a delicate truth. Under a brilliant moon, Mary Louise and Henry meet by the creek once more, the reeds whispering in a gentle breeze. They do not need to hide as fearfully as before, though they remain cautious. Their conversation drifts from the trial to dreams of what might come next. Perhaps Henry will take on another case challenging an unjust law, or maybe Mary Louise will find a way to encourage more people to step forward. They share a small laugh, soft and hushed, but genuine. This laughter is new between them, a sign that they can look ahead without their shoulders drawn tight. The creek's gentle murmur seems to agree, weaving their voices into the night air. Mary Louise stands once again on the hill that overlooks the quiet town. First light stretches across rooftops and steeples. The courthouse spire catches a golden beam. She thinks of Henry at his desk, of Mr. and Mrs. Turner waking in their home without the shadow of wrongful imprisonment. She thinks of her own hard-won strength and the strange satisfaction of having done something right, despite the risk. Below, the town is still flawed, riddled with old prejudice and scars that won't vanish in a single sunrise. But now there's a crack in that old wall. Through it, a sliver of light shines. Mary Louise presses a hand to her heart, knowing that both she and Henry will face more trials, more hostility. Yet they will meet these challenges as they did the first one, with quiet resolve and simple acts of courage. She turns to descend the hill, the morning air fresh in her lungs. The future is uncertain, but no longer entirely grim. If one case can shift the balance, perhaps more will follow. Hope, once a whisper, now softly hums.